10 of the fantasy football season. His wide receivers start sit every matchup this week. Thursday night, Cincinnati Bengals at the Baltimore Ravens. We saw early in the season a shootout between these two division rivals where the Baltimore Ravens came back and won that ball game. Jamar Chase, he's a start each and every week for the Cincinnati Bengal team. He was a top receiver taken off the board, and he's played great football. T. Higgins, we'll see if he returns in this game after missing the last two with the injury. And T. Higgins is in a contract season, and early in the games he's played this season, he's had impact and put up numbers. So this week, we know Cincinnati, they're on the brink of things and they need a victory. And I think T. Higgins will suit up in this one. Now to the Ravens, Zay Flowers, another 100-yard game, 2 touchdowns last week. And he's been the number one option in this passing game all season long for this Baltimore Raven team. He's a start each and every week. Cincinnati can't stop anyone. Deontay Johnson obviously got traded last week to Baltimore. He was on a snap count. He didn't see much of the field. But this week, I believe we see more Deontay Johnson. And he's a good route runner, good hands. And he's definitely going to help this offense as well. Rashad Bateman is sit. Bateman, he had a couple pop games early in the season. But he's been an inconsistent wide receiver. And someone, if he's not getting that deep ball, who's not really putting up numbers. New York Giants, Carolina Panthers, Munich, Germany ball game. And this one, both teams are 2-7 on the season. Obviously bad teams, but there's some fantasy value in these games. Malik Neighbors, he's a start each and every week. I know the first month of the season, he was putting up elite numbers was Malik Neighbors. Now he's putting up more wide receiver 2 type numbers for fantasy owners. But he's easily the top target for this Giant team. This is a great matchup versus a Panthers secondary that can't stop anyone. And the thing with Neighbors, I think the league adjusted to him a little bit. And especially the concussion where he missed 2 games. Definitely did him in as well. Wan'Dale Robinson, a flex option. The last couple weeks, his numbers have dropped way down. Where Wan'Dale Robinson has good hands and he's a good underneath route runner, yard after catch player. And this week, in a matchup versus the Panthers, I think he could be a decent flex option for owners. With 4 teams on bye, Xavier Legette, he's a flex option. 2 weeks in a row finding the end zone. Number 1 wide receiver for this Carolina Panther team with Deontay Johnson traded away to the Baltimore Ravens. And this week, it's a pretty decent matchup, and we've seen the talent from Legette. Why he was a first-round pick in the NFL draft this season. So I think Legette could go out there and help owners with these bye weeks. Jalen Coker, Adam Thielen assists. Coker last week, we didn't see much. 2 catches, 36 yards. A big target, no doubt about it. This ball game, I think, could be tightly contested between these 2-7 teams. But Coker, we have to see more from him weekly to be in the lineup. And Adam Thielen possibly could return to the lineup in this ball game and possibly could be traded as well is Adam Thielen. So he's a sit either way in this ball game, not at 100%, and who knows how he'll fit into this offense. San Francisco 49ers at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Deebo Samuel, he's a start each and every week. Ayuk obviously out for the season, so now Deebo stepping in and becoming the number 1 wide receiver easily for this team. Ricky Pearsall, Juwan Jennings, the flex options in this one. We know Tampa Bay, one of the worst secondaries in all pro football. And we'll see if Juwan Jennings returns. He's been out over the last few weeks, but he's definitely going to have a good role in this offense. We saw early in the season filling in when Deebo was out. 11 catches, 175 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So Juwan Jennings, he's got good rapport with Brock Purdy, where they were playing with the second team a lot a few years ago before Purdy was the starter for this Niner team. So if he does play in this game, I think he's a flex option. Now to the Bucs, Jalen McMillan, Sterling Shepard, Trey Palmer, all sits for me in this one. It's tough to trust any of these guys in this offense. McMillan, a rookie, Shepard, a veteran, but he's been banged up pretty much his whole career. And Trey Palmer, a young wide receiver as well. So Baker Mayfield, he's pretty much been locked in with Cade Otton and Rashad White catching the football out of the backfield, where these wide receivers, their numbers have been inconsistent. So this week in a tough matchup, it's tough to trust these players. Atlanta Falcons at the New Orleans Saints. Drake London, he left early in that ball game versus the Dallas Cowboys, where he made a nice catch in the back of the end zone, then got a hip pointer, he left. So we'll see if he plays in this one, but he might not play in this one. Is Drake London, where he left early in the game and he was in street clothes in the second half. But if he plays, he's a start each and every week. Good matchup at the Saints. Their defense can't stop anyone. Darnell Mooney, he's been a great number 2 wide receiver this season for the Atlanta Falcons. A great deep ball threat and a good yard after catch wide out. So he's a start. Ray McLeod, if, let's say, Drake London's out, he's still a sit for me. I know McLeod found the end zone last week versus the Dallas Cowboys, but if he didn't have that touchdown, he really didn't do much. And I believe Kyle Pitts will get more involved in this ball game. Now to the Saints, Chris Olave, he was concussed. He went to the hospital. Yeah, he was released the same day, but I just don't believe he's going to play in this ball game. He had to get carted off and everything. So it's down to Cedric Wilson and Marquez Valdez-Scantling, where Bub Means he's on injured reserve. And these were the two wide receivers operating as the top options in that ball game once Olave went out at the Carolina Panthers. So obviously they're not options, they're both sits. Denver Broncos at the Kansas City Chiefs. Cortland Sutton to start for me in this one, but I'm going to be a little weary in Cortland Sutton in this ball game, where obviously he's had two pretty decent matchups the last couple weeks, where he went over 100 yards 2 games in a row. Is Cortland Sutton. He's the number one option in that offense in the passing game. Devon Vele, Troy Franklin, little Jordan Humphrey, those guys really aren't fantasy options. They're not listed on here. So I'm going to have Cortland Sutton as a start, but obviously I'm going to be not 100% invested, thinking he's going to go out there once again, have a solid game. DeAndre Hopkins a start. I know it's a tougher matchup with Patrick Surtain most likely covering him in this ball game, but we did see last week Zay Flowers went for over 100 yards and found the end zone twice versus Bronco defense. Hopkins and Mahomes, they hit on some big plays in that good victory in overtime versus Tampa Bay Bucks on Monday Night Football, and Hopkins had one of his best games in a while, over 25 fantasy points, over 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he's in the starting lineup, even though I think his numbers take a hit as well this week with Surtain on him most of the ball game. Xavier Worthy's a sit for me. Worthy, it's pretty much been a deep play or nothing for a touchdown, or a gadget play for a touchdown this season. So Worthy's got a lot of speed, but he's not creating separation. And right now, he's the third or fourth option in this offense anyway, with Travis Kelce, DeAndre Hopkins, Kareem Hunt ahead of him in the pecking order. And this week, I believe Xavier, he could have a decent game, but we just haven't seen consistency so far from him in his rookie season. And this week, he's a sit for me. Buffalo Bills at the Indianapolis Colts. Amari Cooper, he was out last week with a wrist injury. I believe he returns in this one, and he's a start for me. Amari Cooper, he makes a big impact, no doubt about it. In the game, he didn't do much for Buffalo going back a few weeks at Seattle. Everyone was playing good football and putting up numbers, so Cooper's a start. Khalil Shakir, one of the better possession and slot receivers in the league this season. And it's pretty easy to do that, obviously, with Josh Allen as your quarterback. So Shakir coming off 11.5 fantasy point game last week. I think this week at Indianapolis, he's a good start. Keon Coleman, he got banged up, took some big hits in that ball game, and we'll see if he plays with the hand injury. So if he does, he's a flex option. Josh Downs, pretty much the only startable wide receiver for this Indianapolis Colts team, and him, Joe Flacco, have a good rapport. He's a start each and every week with Flacco in their quarterback. Michael Pittman out with Pierce, inconsistent wide receivers. And the thing with Michael Pittman, he's obviously not 100%. Going back weeks ago, remember there were reports he possibly will go on IR with a bad back, but obviously that didn't happen. But Pittman's definitely not 100%. And Joe Flacco's locked in with Downs. And now with Pierce, he's nothing more than a deep ball threat, and at times the number 3 wide receiver for the Colts. Pittsburgh Steelers at the Commanders, George Pickens, he's a start each and every week. Him and Russell Wilson, they've been locked in the 2 starts we've seen Wilson this season. And Pickens, we know he's a big play wide receiver, just inconsistency at times. And even going back to a few games ago where his snap count was on a pitch count as well. But right now, Pickens is locked in. He's having more success with Russell Wilson in their quarterback. And I think he wanted Wilson in there quarterback, where Fields, we know, is more running the football and an underneath thrower most times. Calvin Austin is it. I know he had a breakout game a few weeks ago versus the New York Giants was Calvin Austin. But this week, I believe it's going to be tough for everyone to get in and have a good game versus a Commander defense that's improving weekly. So we got to see more out of Austin. He's a sit. Scary Terry McLaurin, he's a start each and every week. Last week, the receiving yards were down, but he did find the end zone twice at the New York Giants. And this week, in a tougher matchup versus one of the better defenses in the league, I still believe McLaurin could go out there, have another good game. Noah Brown, the last couple weeks, he's starting to emerge in this offense, but he's not a consistent option week in and week out, because with Jaden Daniels running the football, obviously, and McLaurin being the number 1 option in the passing game, and Zach Ertz, who's been the number 2 option as well in the passing game. Besides last week, he had a down game. We got to see Noah Brown be consistent week in and week out. And in this week, in a tough matchup versus Pittsburgh, I just don't see it. Minnesota Vikings at the Jaguars. Justin Jefferson, he's a start each and every week. Last week, big ball game, 136 yards receiving. This week, a great matchup at the Jaguars. They can't stop anyone. He's locked in as a top 3 option. Jordan Addison, he's a flex. Last week, found the end zone. And Sam Darnold, he wasn't getting the football to Jordan Addison a lot. But with TJ Hawkinson back in the lineup, even though he's not 100% and he's on a snap count. Addison's going to get more looks, I believe. We saw Naylor and Addison find the end zone last week in Oliver for this Minnesota Viking team. But this week with a plus matchup, he's a flex. Brian Thomas is a start. I know last week he only had 22 yards and a 2-point conversion. But he's a great, talented wide receiver. And we know this Minnesota Viking team gives up a lot of fantasy points on the season to wideouts, believe it or not. So after a bad game, I believe he bounces back. And also, we know he's not 100% as well with the rib injury. Parker Washington is City filled in with Christian Kirk, who's out for the season with broken collarbone. But Parker Washington, it's tough to trust him, obviously, unless you're in the deepest of leagues. Patriots at the Bears, Demario Douglas, Kendrick Bourne, Jalen Polk, all these wide receivers are sits. This team's pretty much Ramondre Stevenson, Drake May, who's been a good runner of the football, and Hunter Henry at the tight end position, who's the #1 passing option in this offense. So all these wide receivers, they've had a game here and there, but they're all inconsistent and tough to trust, especially versus a pretty solid secondary, still in my opinion, of the Chicago Bears. DJ Moore, he's a start in this ball game. DJ Moore, one of the better route runners in the league. I know 3 weeks in a row he's failed to reach double-digit fantasy points. But this week, I believe, versus New England, he finally breaks out. Has a good game. Roma Dunze, a flex option. He didn't do much all season long, was Roma Dunze, until last week. 5 catches, 104 yards in that tough loss at Arizona. And then you had to go all the way back to week 3 at Indianapolis, where he had a double-digit fantasy game, over 100 yards and a touchdown in that one. So this week at best, he's still a flex option. We have to see more consistency out of the rookie. And to be honest, but besides DeAndre Swift and DJ Moore for the most part, this offense all season long has been inconsistent. Keenan Allen, I think his best days are behind him. Injuries have been a problem on and off this season. And the rapport with Caleb Williams has been a problem. And at 32 years old, you know, the decline is in for Keenan Allen. So he's tough to trust. He's a sit. Tennessee Titans at the Chargers. Calvin Ridley a sit. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine a sit as well. Calvin Ridley, the last couple weeks, he's definitely improved and put up numbers. But this is a tough matchup with the Los Angeles Chargers. And we saw last week the damage they did going in there at Cleveland. So I think it's going to be a tough game for Tennessee offensively. Like I said, Calvin Ridley, he's played better, but he's still tough to trust, even with Mason Rudolph, who's been better than Will Levis, a quarterback. Westbrook-Ikhine, 3 weeks in a row, he's found the end zone for this Tennessee Titan team. But if he don't get those touchdowns, he's not putting up numbers. And now with more spotlight on him over the last few weeks, I think this Charger team pay more attention to Westbrook-Ikhine in this one, where we'll see now where there's tighter coverage on him. If he could go out there and produce. Ladd McConkey, he's a flex option for me. McConkey's been pretty good over the last couple weeks. Last week wasn't a great game for him, where Quentin Johnson came in and had the big performance. But McConkey, 2 weeks in a row now, consistent numbers. And in my opinion, still the #1 option in the passing game. Quentin Johnson is it. I know he went out there, had over 100 yards, found the end zone in the ball game at the Cleveland Browns. But Quentin Johnson, we've seen a lot of inconsistencies over the last couple seasons. And this Tennessee defense is a good defense for the most part this season. I know going back week 7, week 8, they got destroyed by the Bills and the Detroit Lions. But this week, I believe Quentin Johnson, he's not going to put up those numbers like we saw last week. He's definitely a pickup off the wire, but not someone I have confidence in starting. New York Jets at the Arizona Cardinals. Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, their starts. It was a monster game for this New York Jet team last week, including a great one-hand catch in the back of the end zone. And this Cardinals secondary isn't all that great. I know they shut down the Bears offense last week, but this Jet offense, they're putting up points. And believe it or not, the Jets' problem's been the defense this season. And Adams last week found the end zone first as a New York Jet. Him and Aaron Rodgers are getting back to where they were a few seasons ago. They're getting the rust off, and he's a start. Marvin Harrison a start. It's one good game, one bad game in the rookie season, it seems like, for Harrison. So last week was the bad game. And this week, I think he'll have the decent game as Marvin Harrison. Most likely, Sauce Gardner is going to be shadowing him the majority of the game. But he's got a big mismatch as Harrison. And he's got to start using his height, his advantage as Marvin Harrison. And Kyler Murray, we know in terms of getting the football down the field and zeroing in on a #1 wide receiver, he's been inconsistent throughout his career. But Marvin Harrison, I believe this week bounces back. He's a start. And he's a guy you took in that second, third round, where you have to have confidence and hope he puts in a good game. Michael Wilson is it. We haven't seen much from him besides a couple games here and there. Finding the end zone is Michael Wilson. And this New York Jet team, they think they got a chance to go into Arizona and win the ball game. And if they could shut down Marvin Harrison and Wilson, they have a good opportunity. But like I said, Michael Wilson, we haven't seen much out of him in last week. He only had one target in the goose egg. Philadelphia Eagles at the Dallas Cowboys. A.J. Brown, he's a start in this one. I know he left the game with a knee injury last week in the victory versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. But if he does play, he's a start each and every week. And he obviously has a great track record versus division rival, the Dallas Cowboys. Devonta Smith, he could be in line for a big target role once again in this one if A.J. Brown's out. Smith last week, one drive alone, he went out there and put in a big performance with Devonta Smith. So we know he's a deep ball threat. We know he's a boom or bust receiver at times. But when he booms, he puts up big numbers. And this Cowboys secondary hasn't stopped anyone all season long. So both these receivers, if Brown plays, a must start. CeeDee Lamb a start. Last week, he hurt the shoulder in that ball game versus the Atlanta Falcons, landing on it a couple times. But Lamb, he was out for a couple drives on a 2-point conversion attempt. He came in for the Dallas Cowboys, and he actually caught the 2-point conversion to CeeDee Lamb. So obviously, he's locked in weekly as a start. Jalen Tolbert to sit. I know he found the end zone last week for this Cowboy team, but his ceiling has been low as Jalen Tolbert. Pretty much 10 points it's been for him over the last few weeks. Rushes in their quarterback. This offense, I believe, is even going to have a tougher time moving the football versus this Eagle defense that's starting to improve a little bit as the weeks go on. Sunday night, Detroit Lions at the Texans. Amon-Ra St. Brown, what a ball game once again for him. He's a start each and every week. Him and Jared Goff, they're locked in. This has a potential shootout between these two teams. And St. Brown, he was a top option off the board for a reason. He's putting up elite numbers once again. Jameson Williams most likely returning off the suspension this weekend. Jameson Williams, he's a big deep ball threat. He's been great for this Lion team this season, but the last two games they haven't missed a beat without Williams in the lineup. But he's a flex option for me returning. I believe he won't be at 100% capacity in terms of route participation in the snaps. He's playing as the number 2 receiver. Nico Collins supposedly returning in this ball game, and that's the big boost this Texan team needs with Stephon Diggs out for the season. And Collins was the best wide receiver arguably in fantasy football before he went down with injury. He's a start. Tank Dell a start. Now the number 2 option in the passing game. We saw a monster game for him last week at the Jets. 6 catches, 126 yards, and a touchdown. And this offense, I know they lost Stephon Diggs, but last season was a lethal offense. And now with all their pieces back in the lineup here, it's pretty much the same offense like last season for this Texan team. So they both starts. Final game of the week, Monday night. Miami Dolphins at the Rams. Tyreek Hill locked in as a start. I know he hasn't had the monster game yet in the 2 weeks to his return, but this offense, they've been playing good football the last 2 weeks. Defense has been the problem for Miami because 2 games in a row, 27 points for them. So Tyreek Hill's locked in as a start. Jalen Waddle was hit. He's pretty much been non-existent for this Miami Dolphin team. Last week, he scored a late touchdown in that one to tie the ball game up. Then Buffalo went down, scored, and won the ball game. But if Waddle didn't get that touchdown, he would have had 2 catches for -4 yards. I know the last play of the game was a lateral, and he tried to make some crazy cross-the-field run with Waddle where he lost 23 yards on the play. But even that, he wasn't getting targeted. A couple weeks ago versus Arizona as well, he didn't do much. And he's tough to trust even with Tua back. Los Angeles Rams, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, their starts in this one. Cooper Kupp, big ball game, 11 catches, over 100 yards. Last week in the overtime victory at Seattle. Puka Nacua, he was ejected for throwing a punch in that game. I don't believe he'll be suspended a game or anything. Obviously, pay a fine, and it should be all right as Puka Nacua. And plus, he was dealing with a knee injury going into that game, hurting it in practice. So maybe getting ejected early in that game will help Puka's knee become even healthier. So he's a start. Demarcus Robinson, 3 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks, including 2 touchdowns last week. And we saw this at the end of last season in second half of last year as well, where he started really emerging as the number 3 wide receiver, where Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua both were healthy at the same time. So defenses, they're not going to pay much attention to Robinson. He's going to have a nice one-on-one coverage and in the slot at times as well. And this week versus Miami secondary, that can't stop anyone. I actually believe with 4 teams on bye, Robinson's a flex option. Sets wide receivers, start, sits every matchup for week 10 of the fantasy football season.